quarterback is always a really interesting position to talk about because unlike tight end, which every year people claim is super deep and there's tons of guys you can draft and start, it always turns out to be mid. Quarterback, however, is in fact an incredibly deep position year in and year out. This year more than others, I think. There are guys legitimately going in the back halves of draft, sometimes round 10, 11, 12, who could be QB1 overall give you QB1 overall production. They should be starters on a team in your fantasy leagues. So with quarterback, it then becomes a question of looking at where can I get the best value for the production I'm going to get out of my quarterback slot. There are guys who definitely give you more points per week. There are definitely elite options. But the question then becomes, is it worth getting an elite option and giving up another player that you could spend that draft capital on? Or is it better to wait until the back half of your draft and find a guy who will just be good enough and give you good production, but nothing too crazy? And I'm of the opinion this year that you should probably just wait until the back half of your draft, spend the first half getting high value players at the positions of running back, wide receiver, maybe an elite tight end if you really feel good about one of those guys, because I think that you can get good value at quarterback at a position later in your drafts where the value at running back, wide receiver, tight end really isn't there, but the value at quarterback maintains a relative high value over the course of your draft. So because of that, I think that this is a great year to wait on quarterback. So today, I'm going to go through every single fantasy relevant quarterback for the 2026 season. I've broken them up into 5 tiers, starting with the elite guys who are going very early in drafts and ending with the bottom of the barrel, might go undrafted guys. And I'm going to break down the pros and cons of every single one, give you my favorite and least favorite guy in every single tier, and at the end of the day, hopefully, using this video, you'll be able to decide who your quarterback will be for the 2026 fantasy season. So without further ado, let's get into it. Off with the absolute elite guys, the best of the best, and that is Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. Both of these guys are absolute fantasy demons, primarily because they have huge rushing upside in addition to being electric passers. Rushing upside is one of the biggest cheat codes for a fantasy quarterback because you get 0.1 points for every rushing yard a quarterback gains as opposed to 0.04 for every passing yard they throw. So it's 2.5 times more valuable for every rushing yard they get. Because of that, quarterbacks who can run often have a built-in safety net or higher floor compared to guys who don't run just thanks to that rushing value alone. However, these two guys have both the passing and the rushing, as I previously mentioned, and that just puts them over the top as clear and away the best 2 options in fantasy. Now, between these 2 guys, I do feel like if you're going to take a guy this early, going to spend a significant draft capital on them. I mean, you look at these 2 guys. Josh Allen's a clear 2nd round pick. Lamar Jackson's a low 2nd, early 3rd round pick. And if you're going to go big for a quarterback, I would just take Josh Allen primarily because he has consistently over the last 3 years scored double-digit rushing touchdowns every game. Lamar Jackson has not done that. He was injured last year. That's the reason his points per game is significantly lower than Josh Allen's. Last year was a bit of a statistical outlier. He does better normally. But I think that Josh Allen's just consistent rushing touchdown production puts him as the better option. If you're going to take an elite quarterback, I would just take Josh Allen a few spots earlier than Lamar Jackson. Now, if you're not in a position to take Josh Allen because you're behind where he's going to be able to go, I don't think Lamar Jackson's a bad option. I think he's a perfectly reasonable option. I think he will bounce back from an injury-riddled 2025 campaign. He does also have he has had more rushing yards than Josh Allen over the last 2 years. However, he just hasn't scored as many rushing touchdowns, which is the edge that Josh Allen has. However, I think they're both good picks at the end of the day. They're both just absolutely elite weapons who have shown that they do not need any help to carry an offense. They do all the work, and because of that, they score an ungodly amount of fantasy points. Both good picks. I personally wouldn't take an early quarterback. I like going late quarterback, like I said earlier. But if you like early quarterback because you want a guy who's going to score you a lot of points every week, both of these guys are elite options. Next group of guys are what I like to call high upside with risk, which is to say that On any given week, these guys have the ability to score as many points as Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson. They're not any worse. They're all elite talents playing in elite offensive systems. However, they all have downsides. They all have risks that could lead them to busting in a way that I don't think Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson could, barring injury, of course. Injury can ruin any quarterback, but these guys all have risks. And because of that, it's important to evaluate both the pros and cons of these guys. So the first guy in this tier is Drake May. He's the QB3. He had an absolutely elite 2025 season. He threw over 30 touchdowns, led his team to the Super Bowl. Just a great player, averaging over 20 points a game. So Drake May, he has the rushing upside, just like Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. And he's also shown to have the passing upside. So he does absolutely appear to be in the same prototype as Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. The only question people have with Drake May is, can he repeat his 2025 campaign for a second year? Drake May is only in his third year. His first year was bogged down by questionable team building around him. And then in 2025, he had an easy schedule. That's all anyone wanted to talk about with the Patriots, is that their schedule, they did not play a lot of very good teams and a lot of very good defenses. So the question is now, can Drake May put up another 18 to 20 points per game season with a hard schedule? I think that there's no reason to think he can't. However, I do think that he is high. He is the highest rated of these guys in tier 2. He's going 35th overall. There's about a 10 spot difference, which is about a round difference between Drake May and the next guy in this tier. I do think that Drake May is a guy who needs to fall for me to want to get him, because I don't see a reason for him to be ranked this much higher than the other guys. Do I think the Patriots are going to fall apart this year and Drake May is going to be ass? No. But do I think that he's going to be far and away better than these guys barring injury? These other guys barring injury? No. So because of that, I'm not super thrilled on Drake May, but he is a guy who I think he's a good player and he's a good pick, just a little high for me. The next guy in this tier is Joe Burrow. He had an injury-riddled season, and that is the thing you need to know about Joe Burrow, is he gets injured, it seems, every other season. And it's literally, if you look at the seasons, every other season. So by that logic, it should not be a Joe Burrow injury season. So, assuming Joe Burrow doesn't, rupture a testicle week 3, he is set up to succeed. Now, Joe Burrow has no rushing upside. He scrambles, but he doesn't really run consistently like the other two guys. What he does have, though, is the best weapons in the National Football League. And because of that, this man slings the ball like there's no tomorrow. He can absolutely put up elite weeks as a pure pocket passer, which is not something you see in the National Football League. A lot of the pure pocket passers will have bust weeks, and yes, Joe Burrow will probably have 1 or 2 a year, but he's shown to be able to have an incredibly high floor as just a pocket passer because of how well he's able to sling the ball. So I think he's a great pick. I do kind of like some of the guys below him a little bit more, because I think that he's still going pretty high for a guy who is just a pocket passer and has always the injury concern. But if you want to lock down the quarterback position with Joe Burrow and you're not worried about the injury, I mean, if he stays healthy, he'll probably be a top 6 quarterback. The next guy is Jayden Daniels. He's going about a half a round after Joe Burrow. He also had an injury-riddled season, and that's another one of the concerns I have with Jayden Daniels, is he has the rushing upside. He was an elite quarterback 2 years ago in his rookie season, but he got injured last season. There are some concerns about his frame. He's a little bit of a slight guy, not super big. There are some concerns that the National Football League might beat him up and chew him out. And he also is in an offensive system where, unlike Joe Burrow, he doesn't have a lot of weapons. The Commanders have not done a great job of building pieces around Jayden Daniels. He has a questionable run game, questionable weapons outside of his number 1 option in Terry McLaurin. And because of that, I just worry that the Commanders might falter as a team and drag Jayden Daniels down with him. Now, he has the rushing upside, so he's got that built-in floor I talked about. I think the odds are that if he has a bad season, he still might finish higher than some of the other guys if he has a bad season. But I am concerned about the injury a little bit. I am concerned about the situation Washington has put him in, but he's got the rushing upside. He's going 2 rounds after Drake May, which is a pretty insane value. However, I do think he is my least favorite of the guys in this tier, just because of the situation the Commanders have decided to put him in. The last guy in this tier is Jalen Hurts. And Jalen Hurts is such an interesting player because he has significant rushing upside and massive rushing touchdown upside because of the Philadelphia Eagles' signature play, the tush push, where they essentially line up a bunch of big guys on the offensive line and have the running back cup Jalen Hurts' ass and just shove him into the end zone from the 1-yard line. And because of that, for the last 3 or 4 years, he was scoring double-digit rushing touchdowns a game. Now, last season, we saw the tush push kind of decline in efficiency. They failed it on average 30% more last season than they had in previous seasons. And for the first time in the last 3 years, Jalen Hurts did not score double-digit rushing touchdowns because of that. So there is a question of, does Jalen Hurts just, without the tush push, maintain the same rushing value as he had with the tush push? We saw last year the rushing touchdowns went down. He doesn't run as much as you might think. He does run, but he didn't run for 500 yards. He ran for only 400. And we also saw that down the stretch of the season, the Eagles fell apart. And when the Eagles fell apart, Jalen Hurts fell apart with them. And that is my biggest concern with Hurts, is just he's a guy who needs organizational stability. A guy like Josh Allen has shown that even when his GM or his offensive system is kind of all over the place, he has shown the ability to just keep trucking through it, regardless of the weapons put around him, regardless of the offensive coordinator calling the plays. He just keeps trucking. Jalen Hurts, however, has shown that when the Eagles have a bad offensive coordinator running the shot plays, their offense falls apart and he falls apart with it. Now, they do have a new offensive coordinator this year, but they've also traded out a lot of their old weapons. They traded out A.J. Brown for a guy they took in the 2026 NFL draft in Mekhi Lemon. There is a question about how the offense will function without A.J. Brown. There's questions of, can Saquon Barkley get back to his 2024 form or something close to it? And I think that if the offense does bounce back, which there's a good chance it does, I think Jalen Hurts will be a great fantasy pick. I think he's probably the best guy in this tier if you believe in the Eagles in 2026. However, there is a question of just, will he be able to be the same elite guy if the tush push remains more ineffective than it has been in previous years? If the offense is slow going, will he be a guy you feel comfortable starting? Because that is ADP in the fifth round. He's a guy who you need to start. He needs to be, if you're taking him in the 5th round, he needs to be your week in and week out starter. And if the Eagles falter at any point and you don't feel great starting him, that's not a great fantasy pick. However, I personally believe in the Eagles. So because of that, I'm going to be taking, I think, a lot of Jalen Hurts this year, just because I think he's the last guy before a massive tier break in the quarterback position towards the big collection of guys who are all fighting for the last QB1 spots. So because of that, I'm into Jalen Hurts, although I am always just a little bit concerned of, if you start seeing or hearing some questionable things out of Eagles training camp, maybe pump the brakes a little bit. All right. Tier 3 is filled with a bunch of guys who are all kind of smushed together in terms of, they're all going to be good, but some of these guys might be better. So the question then becomes, which one of these guys is going to be the best and who should you take? And that's going to be a judgment call on your part. I'm going to lay out the pros and cons, but you're going to have to make a judgment call on these guys on draft day. The first guy, and in my opinion the worst guy, is Caleb Williams. And he is a really interesting player because he's a player who a lot of people think has yet to reach his ceiling. They think he has a lot more to give in the game of football, and that he could very easily smash the stats he's put up the past couple of years. And because of that, he's ranked the highest. The problem is, he's also shown to be an inconsistent player who is not able to consistently sustain drives and hit a lot of the time the layup throws, just because he's a fluky player sometimes. And because of that, I'm just concerned about, everyone wants to project a jump from Caleb. What if there's no jump? What if he's just the same guy as last year, which is a 27 touchdown, 10 interception guy who throws barely 4,000 yards, maybe a little less than 4,000 yards, or maybe 4,000 yards. But if he doesn't make a jump, I think that he's way too high compared to the other guys. So because of that, I think with Caleb, I'm fading him just because if he shows this year that he can do it, I'll take him next year. I think I'd rather go with the guy who's already shown they can do it. Next guy, Justin Herbert, going a tiny bit after Caleb. The argument for Herbert is that his offensive system has improved massively. He lost both of his tackles to injury last year. If they're alive, he should be able to sustain drives and throw the ball in the pocket much more comfortably, which is what Herbert wants to do. They bring in Mike McDaniel this offseason. He is to be offensive coordinator. He is a great offensive mind. I think he should elevate this offense. You have the return of Amarian Hampton, the running back, which should improve the run game. And I know Herbert doesn't score points when he hands the ball off, but I think that he will benefit from a run game that helps him sustain drives. All of this to say, Herbert is in a much better position going into 2026 compared to what happened during 2025. And we've seen in the past, both last year and in his early career, that Herbert can be an elite pocket passer. And we've also seen rushing upside as recently as last year. The problem with Herbert is we've also seen that Herbert, like a lot of these guys in this tier, just has a low floor. There will be weeks where Herbert scores 12 points. And I'm also concerned that a lot of the weeks last year where he didn't score 12 points was because he was running. The problem was he wasn't running because he's Josh Allen and he likes to run. He was running for his life. And I'm just concerned that rushing upside might disappear if he has a consistent run game and if his tackles and offensive line aren't collapsing immediately. So I like Herbert. I think the offensive situation is trending towards him being more productive this season. I am concerned that the rushing might disappear and he could just be a guy in the pack instead of a guy you're super excited about. A guy I am excited about, though, is Trevor Lawrence, going a few picks after Justin Herbert. We saw Trevor Lawrence over the course of last season go from an inconsistent starter to a guy who was just elite. Down the stretch after the bye, Trevor Lawrence was lighting the world on fire. He was the best quarterback by far in fantasy. He showed an elite rushing upside we didn't know he had, while at the same time slinging the football like there was no tomorrow. And going into this season, I look at the system around Trevor Lawrence, and it just fills me with hope. He has so many weapons to throw the ball to. He has a great offensive mind in Liam Cohen, and I think at the end of the day, that's the thing that pushes it over the edge for me with Trevor Lawrence, and why he's my favorite guy in this tier is just, I think Liam Cohen's a genius. He got the best season out of any season in Baker Mayfield's career out of Baker Mayfield, made him look like a borderline MVP candidate. He leaves and Baker immediately falls off a cliff. Meanwhile, he goes to Jacksonville and Trevor Lawrence immediately also turns into an MVP candidate down the stretch after he's had a little bit of time to adapt to Liam Cohen's system. With a full year in Liam Cohen's system, I think Trevor Lawrence could maybe not replicate exactly the insanity run he had down the stretch in 2025, but I think he could do something close to it. If I get Trevor Lawrence, especially if I get Trevor Lawrence at a value because people are fading him based on, what he's previously done, I'm super excited. I feel super confident about Trevor Lawrence as my QB1 with Liam Cohen's offensive system, with a running back room that necessarily could be good but might not be great, giving Trevor plenty of opportunity to replicate the rushing upside he had in 2025. Is the floor still low? Are there weeks where he might score 10, 11, 12 points? Probably. But I do think that overall, Trevor Lawrence could very easily turn into a borderline tier 2 guy. Dak Prescott is the next guy. The argument for Dak is he's just diet Joe Burrow. He has elite weapons and he slings the football, but he has no rushing upside. If you want a safe guy, I think Dak is the safest guy on this list. He's probably, barring injury, going to rep out somewhere between 17 and 18 points per game like he did last year. He just has such great weapons and a great offensive line. He just has no rushing upside. So because of that, doesn't have, I think, that caps his ceiling compared to the other guys. But good pick. Jackson Dart is pretty much the exact opposite of Dak Prescott. His weapons are a little questionable, but he has massive rushing upside. Last year, he basically bullied his way to being a QB1 in points per game by the rushing upside. The rushing upside made him. He was a questionable passer at times, but he ran so much and for so many touchdowns that it just ballooned his point total. The problem with Jackson Dart is when he runs, he has a high likelihood of blowing his back out. He seems to love to want to smack his head off things. He had like 4 concussions last year, despite only starting half the season. It was not good. And there's a little bit of concern that if he reps that out again, he might get injured again. And if he gets injured, he's not starting for your fantasy team. So that's the concern. There is also concern about his passing upside, given the questions around Malik Nabers, the questionable receiving core behind Malik Nabers, and the fact that he was okay. He was an okay passer last year, but he wasn't great. So I think, though, that the rushing upside, he has the most rushing upside out of anyone in this tier. He's probably the last elite rusher quarterback you're going to get before you start getting into guys who don't have a lot of rushing upside. So, good pick. Injuries a little bit concerning. Receiving core and passing upside a little bit concerning. That's why he's this low, though. So the concern's kind of baked into it. Brock Purdy. He's kind of just Justin Herbert and Trevor Lawrence. He has elite rushing upside. He has a great offensive system with an offensive coach. They literally signed Deebo Samuel yesterday, so that's another weapon for Brock Purdy. He showed that last season that he can absolutely scoot. He's got the low floor. He's got the bust games. He's got the games where he scores 25 points and booms. He's got the games where he scores 10 points and busts. He's got the games where he scores less than 10 points and busts. It's just part of the Brock Purdy experience. There's a reason he's going 93rd overall and not in the 50s like some of the other quarterbacks. It's built into his total. He scored a lot of fantasy points last year because he scored a lot of rushing touchdowns last year. Does he score that many rushing touchdowns this year again? I don't know. We'll have to see. But he's just another guy where if you miss out on Trevor Lawrence, you miss out on Justin Herbert, Brock Purdy's a perfectly reasonable guy to put in your fantasy football starting lineup. He's got that lower floor compared to other guys, but he still has some amount of ceiling. So that's what makes him, in my opinion, a good quarterback. Last guy on this list, for the first time ever, Patrick Mahomes hovering around the top, barely in the top 100. That would have been blasphemy a couple years ago. Patrick Mahomes, despite being the NFL's golden boy, has kind of fallen off due to offensive questions, a declining run game, and a lack of receiving weapons. They didn't really fix the receiving weapons part of this, but they brought in Kenneth Walker to fix the run game, and they brought in Eric Bieniemy, the guy who is the mastermind behind Patrick Mahomes' elite early career production, to be their offensive coordinator this season. Now, do I think Patrick Mahomes jumps back to 5,000 yards and 55 touchdowns? No. I think that Tyreek Hill was a big part of that too, and they don't have a receiver the caliber of Tyreek Hill. However, I do think that it's Patrick Mahomes at the end of the day. He is a bona fide top 5 quarterback real life in this league. He's shown rushing upside last season. Could that decline a little bit with an actual run game? Probably. But he's still Patrick Mahomes. He's just Patrick Mahomes. And yes, he's coming back from injury, which is why I definitely think I'm taking all the guys ahead of him before him, just because I'm concerned about his early career production. However, once you get past those early games, I think that he will very quickly be about the same as a Brock Purdy, a Justin Herbert. And I think he has more upside than those guys just based on his own innate talent and the fact that he's just more talented than those guys at playing football. Do I think he surges up to his early career production? No. Do I think he might start a little slow? Yes. Do I think that the receiving core is still a little cringe outside of Rashee Rice? Yes. But at the end of the day, I think that it's perfectly reasonable to expect to expect good quarterback production out of Patrick Mahomes, and he's no longer overvalued. We've spent years with Patrick Mahomes being overvalued at the value he's currently at because of the injury mainly. I think he's a perfectly reasonable fantasy pick. Maybe pair him with another guy just in case he starts slow, but good fantasy pick, good player. Don't overthink it. The next group of guys are just so close to being in the previous tier where they could be QB1s, but I can just see the downfall. I can just see the downside and the situation where they don't return the value of other guys going ahead and behind them. Bo Nix is a really interesting quarterback because he's been a top 12 quarterback for each of his first 2 seasons, but you haven't necessarily been happy about it. He's a guy who can both have elite games, but doesn't have a lot of them, and can also have stinker games and has too many of them. So he's not a guy who you feel super happy or confident in on any given week. He can be good, but he's not always good, and he can be bad, but he's not always bad. So the question, though, going into this season is, can he make the jump to a 30 touchdown, passing touchdown, a seasoned guy, with the addition of Jalen Waddle? The Broncos have made a big splash move to bring in an elite receiver for Bo Nix to throw to, and hopefully that might put him over the top as a elite fantasy quarterback. However, he also plays on a team with an elite defense where he doesn't have to do much. So there is a world where he just continues doing what he's done, does barely enough to get the team over the hump, let the defense do the heavy lifting, and he's just a guy who you don't feel super great about on any given week. He can be good. I think the upside is there. I think he's a perfectly fine pick. However, I do feel a lot more confident about the guys who I've put in a tier above him. The next guy is Matthew Stafford, and the thing is, the regression argument for Stafford is just so obvious. Stafford threw a career-high 44 touchdowns last year at age 34. Stafford has only thrown for 30 touchdowns twice before this in his career. He is going to regress so unbelievably hard. He threw less than 25 touchdowns the previous 2 years before this. And yes, the Rams still have elite weapons. They still have one of the best offensive minds in the game in Sean McVay. Stafford could come back and throw another 30 touchdowns and be a QB1 and a guy who's a huge value at 105th overall. The problem is, I just think the regression is so obvious. I think that there's a much better chance that the Stafford takes a step back. They have an elite defense. They've made sure they've improved their defense so much this offseason where it's sort of the same thing as Bo Nix. What if Stafford just doesn't have to do much in any given game? What if the Rams only need to score 20 points a week to win? And because of that, Stafford can kind of just sit back, throw 1 or 2 passing touchdowns every week, and the Rams win. And the problem is that wouldn't lead to Stafford being a super fantasy relevant quarterback. So I think that with Stafford, you just kind of need to be like, listen, last year was great. If you had Stafford, good for you. He did great for you. But this year, just let it go. Don't chase last year's production. Look at what's more likely where Stafford regresses to his career means and just be like, I'm good. Thank you for your service, Matthew Stafford, but this year, I'm good. Last guy is Jordan Love, and he's a guy who a lot of people aren't putting in this tier. They have him a lot lower. He's a lot lower. That ADP is wrong. He's 120th overall. That ADP is wrong. But he's a guy who a lot of people are down on because he hasn't been necessarily that good these last 2 years. But I think that going into this season, Jordan Love has an upside case of where he might have to sling the ball this season. And I'm doing a little bit of projecting with Jordan Love, but I think it's fair projecting where you look at this Packers defense that was hot garbage after the injury of Micah Parsons, and Micah Parsons is not going to be ready for the start of the season. He might be slow when he does come back, and because of that, this Packers offense might need to move the flippin' football if they want to win football games. They gave Christian Watson a fat bag this offseason. If he stays healthy, Jordan Love should have a clear number 1 option. Tucker Kraft is coming back from injury. He's a great option for Jordan Love. Josh Jacobs is dealing with legal issues, and he kind of regressed a little bit last year. So I wouldn't be surprised if the running game takes a step back. Jordan Love might just have to sling the football. And if he does sling the football, we've seen him throw 30 touchdowns in a season his first year starting. If he does that again, at his current value, he would be an elite fantasy pick with huge amounts of upside for the value you drafted him at. Now, of course, because he's down here on the list, the reason is he could just be bad. He could just be bad. He could just not throw another 25 touchdowns and just be in the same tier as all the rest of these guys, being mid, and he hasn't shown rushing upside, so that he could be bad instead of just mid. But I think the upside case is there. He's a guy who you definitely want to take with a second backup quarterback, just in case he's buns, and that way you have another hook in the water. But I like him a lot. He's my favorite pick. in this tier of guys compared to Bo Nix and Matthew Stafford, just because I think that with the right breaks, he could be an absolutely elite fantasy pick. The last guys on this list are who I are going to affectionately and politely call dart throws. They are the guys where you start to get into the high upside cases, making projections, hoping that something goes right for these guys and that they're able to break out. These guys are by no means sure things. So if you wait this far in your draft to take a quarterback, I would probably take at least 2 of these guys, because you want to try and cast a wide net to hope you can get some kind of fantasy production. The first guy on this tier is Jared Goff, and he's a strange guy because I think the allure of Jared Goff is the high floor. You look at all these other guys, and Jared Goff has the highest points per game of them. He's the only quarterback in the National Football League to throw 30 touchdowns over all of the last 3 years. He's in an elite offensive system with a great head coach and plenty of offensive weapons to play with. The problem with Jared Goff is he's a pure pocket passing quarterback. He has no rushing upside, and unlike Joe Burrow, you really need to throw 35 touchdowns a year minimum to be an elite pocket passing quarterback with no rushing upside. And Goff just doesn't really do that. He kind of skirts right under it. So because of that, Goff has a very clear capped ceiling. Goff is probably going to be a low-end QB1. He's been the QB 9, 10, 8 the past 3 years. And those finishes are largely based on Goff playing all 17 games, playing good for a pocket passing quarterback, but a lot of the higher upside guys missing time, getting injured, stuff like that. And so Goff kind of just scoots in at the end as a guy who just got enough points over the course of the year to be a QB1. However, on a week-to-week basis, Goff has an incredibly capped ceiling. Can he put up 20 points? Yes. Can he put up 5 points? Also yes. He's not going to be a guy who consistently wins you weeks, and he's going to be a guy who sometimes loses you weeks. But if you absolutely just need stable quarterback production and you're scared of these other guys, Jared Goff is probably the most surefire thing out of this tier. The next guy on this list is Kyler Murray, and the sexy thing about Kyler Murray is he's got rushing upside. However, the problem with Kyler Murray, and this is just my opinion, you can disagree, he's not a very good football player. He just got thrown out of his last team for being mid, and now, yes, he's on a better team, the Minnesota Vikings, with a much better offensive-minded coach and better weapons. However, I'm just concerned about how good Kyler really is. And people always want to talk about the rushing upside with Kyler, but we've seen over the last couple years that he's run less and less, I think because he got injured a few years ago and he got dinked and doinked in a few other years, and I think he's scared of getting injured now. And it seems like despite his previous rushing upside, he doesn't want to run as much as he previously has. However, if he does run, and he is able to gel well with this Minnesota Vikings offense, there is a chance that Kyler Murray could be a QB1. He's shown the ability in the past. However, I think that his ceiling is capped by his talent level, and I do think there's a chance that if things go really wrong for Kyler, people don't want to talk about this, but he might lose his job to J.J. McCarthy at some point. There's a third-year quarterback on the Minnesota Vikings who has been disappointing so far, but was selected with a first-round pick. He could take Kyler Murray's job at some point if Kyler plays bad. So I think that's the risk with Kyler. The rushing upside is something that not a lot of the other quarterbacks down here have, but I also think he's not that great of a player overall. Next up, Baker Mayfield. Probably my least favorite player in this tier for dart throwing. Just doesn't seem to have a lot of upside. He doesn't have rushing upside. He was fantasy relevant 2 years ago when he threw 40 touchdowns for the first time in his career. He's never thrown for 30, though, in another season. So it seems like that 1 year was more or less the product of Baker and more the product of his offensive system, which is the main problem I have with Baker is he seems to have been a Liam Cohen merchant. Liam Cohen was his offensive coordinator that year and who has since moved on to be a head coach. And I think that without Liam Cohen, Baker's ceiling may be capped. He's probably a guy who is just going to be an inconsistent pocket passer. Like, yes, he has the weapons, and I do think one of the pros of Baker is he is in a contract year where he might want to play up to try and get that next big contract from either the Bucs or another team. But I'm just concerned about, like, you look at the guys on this list, and I think Jared Goff is a safer pick. He's shown a much higher pocket passing floor than Baker, because with the 30 touchdowns all of the last 3 seasons. And Baker he's a guy who I just don't see as much upside with him as the other guys on this list. Kyler and Malik Willis both have rushing, and Tyler Shough also has rushing and has shown he's more exciting. We haven't seen what Shough has yet. So Baker, kind of out on him. Don't really see the upside with Baker. Probably the least favorite pick. Tyler Shough is my favorite pick, however, because, like I said, he's got rushing, and he has weapons. The Saints have an elite wide receiver 1 in Chris Olave, and they drafted a wide receiver 2 in Jordan Tyson for him to throw to. The bad news about Tyler Shough is just he's unproven. You look at the points per game last year, and if you take out the first 3 games where he was sort of getting his feet wet as a rookie and look at just the last couple, he was averaging 18 points per game over that stretch. And we saw the rushing upside. We saw some level of passing flashing. He flashed as a passer. So the only downside for Shough is he's unproven. He is a second-year player who didn't have a lot of hype coming out of college, who might be good, might not be good. But if he is good, and he can replicate the end of his 2025 campaign, if he averages another 18 points per game, that's a QB1. You're very excited about that. But we'll have to see if he can replicate the combination of rushing upside with improved passing now that the Saints have improved their run game from last year, so Shough might not have to do as much work himself on the ground. The last guy in this tier is Malik Willis, and he is the dartiest of dart throws on this list. He is a career backup quarterback who has found his way into a starting role, and people are excited about him because he has rushing upside, and everyone loves rushing upside. The bad news is he's on a team that has essentially no system around him. He has no pass catchers to throw to. All of his guys are like borderline wide receiver 3s who have all found themselves in the wide receiver 1 role, and he's also a guy who he could just be bad. Like, legitimately, Malik Willis, out of anyone on this list, besides maybe Tyler Shough, could just be bad, and that would just be the end of it. He could be so bad that he's not fantasy relevant. So, that's something to be aware of. Like I said, with him and all the other guys on this list, if you're going to take one, probably take another, unless you've taken someone in an earlier tier. But I do think that these guys all could have some level of fantasy value. It just depends on things breaking right for them. So with that, that's going to be every single quarterback who I think has fantasy value. Once you get past these guys, you start getting into guys who are gross or who I don't think you should be starting or have essentially limited or no upside besides a week-to-week emergency start out of one of them. So if you're in your drafts, you really should be only selecting the guys who I've named out in this video. So I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Bye.